And welcome back to the Livingston Parish News Podcast. My name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us today. We are here with Mr. Garry Talbert, Parish Councilman from District 2, which will be the Watson area. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
We're doing good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. We are here to talk about sort of an ongoing thing. Ordinance Committee has been meeting pretty often, as you and I have sort of discussed in the interim. Y'all have been getting a lot done, getting a lot more meetings in. One of the things y'all wanted to tackle was the subdivision ordinance. It's a hefty ordinance, but a lot of this was just cleaning it up. So we wanted to clarify some of those cleanings that y'all did and why y'all changed the language and that sort of thing. So we appreciate you joining us today. First, let's talk about that first. It is a hefty ordinance. It's about 36 pages. And, you know, there was a lot of communication that had to go into this between a lot of different departments and y'all's attorney. So first, why? What made y'all decide to jump in and do this?
Well, it was a couple things. I guess it was kind of initiated by some gravity drainage districts. Gravity 1 would kind of had a request that we put as-built. That everybody looks at a set of plans. The plans get approved. The subdivision gets constructed. And then later on, you find out stuff's not exactly where they said it was going to be. So what they requested was that a set of as-built be generated of the subdivision before it can be final approval of the subdivision. There's a couple reasons for that. The biggest reason is in the past there are some houses within this parish that are built on top of drain lines. And that occurred because, there was no communication. Basically, somebody in the field, something wouldn't work. They made a correction of it in the field. It wasn't communicated to anybody. And so consequently, where the property lines should have been adjusted, lots should have been adjusted because of that, nothing was done. And you end up, maybe a drain line in their house, which probably isn't a tremendous deal till that drain line leaks. And the reason I think gravity drainage districts made the call is because those are lateral ditches. Those are ultimately their responsibility. And then it becomes tremendously expensive to go slip line, a pipe under a house or something. And whereas normally you could just dig down and fix it, it's underneath the house, it's a different situation. Mm-hmm. And so I think they just want to try to create a situation that there's now, according to this ordinance, there's now going to be an as-built drawn. Planning will be the caretaker of the as-built drawings. And then when you go to build a house in a subdivision, when you go to buy your permit, one of the things you do is you plot the house on that lot. Basically now, part of the process will be when you bring that plot, that house plotted on that, lot to permitting, it'll be sent to planning. Planning will then pull the as-built, compare the as-built drawing to where that house sits, and make sure there are no conflicts. Mm-hmm. And it's just another step in the process to try to, eliminate these things that pop up on occasion. And it was just a checks and balance, type deal. I've seen, there'll be a drawing of a pipe at a certain elevation, and you come in to do some work later. And so that I should be able to go here.
Right.
And then you dig down and realize that pipe's not where it's supposed to be. And so now I've got to change, redraw my plans,
right,
to account for something that got laid at a different elevation or, something that got put in a different place. And so we're trying to just, get a drawing of a subdivision before it's inspected and have a surveyor go out there. It'll require some supervision when stuff's getting put in the ground, mm-hmm, so that they can verify some of these elevations and accumulate them, during the process. It'll put a minimal cost on a developer to do it. It's not as significant. We've talked to some engineers, had some testimony to that effect. But I think the benefit in the parish in the long run will be worth whatever it, costs for those guys to generate those as-builts.
So, and one of the things you were talking about in terms of minimal cost and things that weren't quite as they seemed, y'all have had some people come to you in terms of rental property as well as, the grinder pump fiasco. So, I mean, a lot of these things you're just trying to get some clarification. You're trying to sort of make sure that in that inspection period, y'all have been inserted in the process.
That's it. We're trying to cover all the bases to make sure as many eyes have are on, a set of plans, and as many eyes as possible during the construction process, so that, we're comfortable that when, somebody buys a lot in Livingston Parish, they're getting exactly what they intended to get.
So before we jump into that a little specifically, I want to talk about the term final drawings. Would that be sort of the same as the as-is drawings that you're discussing?
Sure. I mean, that's what we're talking about. I mean, what we're talking about is during the process, there'll be an initial drawing of a subdivision that gets approved at the council, the planning department, the council level early. Then it goes to the engineering, and they'll do a review. The parish engineer will review those plans. At the same time, the engineer for the developer will be doing drainage impact studies and traffic studies and all the other related design things that need to go into the final approval of the plans. There'll be some modifications made throughout the process. The plans get sent to, let's say there's sewer involved. Then the sewer department, will review the plans, the Livingston Parish Sewer District, or it could be the city of Denham, or, whoever's providing sewer. If there's a drainage district, then the plans are supposed to go to the drainage district for them to look over them and identify issues. The drainage impact study also goes to the drainage district so they can verify that they like the calculations. If there's some problem, they make comments, send it back to the parish engineer, who then sends it to the design engineer. But anyway, you end up with a final set of plans that gets approved. Everybody's signed off on final set of construction plans. What we want to make sure is that those as-built plans meet those construction plans. And if there is a variance in them, that the as-built plans reflected, that if it's a significant variance, that the engineers have looked at it and made sure that it doesn't impact the performance of, whether it be sewer, drainage, or whatever. If changes are made, it doesn't negatively impact the original design. And then we know that we're not going to encroach upon, that in theory, now the drains should be in the servitudes. That won't be outside of them, and that no home should be encroaching upon, something that could cause a problem in the future.
So a lot of this is, we're cleaning up logistical issues from, as you look through these changes that y'all have discussed and made throughout the language, which, by the way, you had mentioned have been passed before the parish council attorney, Chris Moody, and given the green light. So, when you're talking about the logistical issues that came from before, do you feel like, especially since you've come into office in 2016 and have heard a lot of these things brought to you, you feel like this addresses a lot of things within subdivisions?
I think it does. Look, I rode by a subdivision the other day that's under construction now, but it's like the fifth filing of the subdivision. The subdivision was, they did one filing, and then, I think right about election time, they submitted 2 through 5. They got approved. I think what you've got, though, is you've got a ditch in that subdivision is about as wide as a servitude. So is there going to be a problem for maintenance on that ditch in the future? Now, some of the changes that we've made, that drawing would have gone to the Garry Drainage District, and that engineer at the Garry Drainage District would have reviewed that set of plans and said, look, we can't have a 15-foot ditch and a 15-foot servitude.
Right.
And so I think we have cleaned up some of the things that cause problems. And I think that, every time we hit a stumbling block, every time we see a potential issue, we're trying to address it to try to clean the whole process up, because ultimately lateral ditches are the responsibility of the Garry Drainage Districts where they're funded. Roadside ditches responsibility of the parish. You've got sewer, whether it be private or public sewer companies that have to maintain some of these sewer lines. We want to make sure that it's done right the first time, so that it'll be easily repaired in the future or maintained in the future if it needs to be addressed. And I think that's that's kind of been the driving force behind every change we've made to the subdivision ordinance, is to try to, identify problems that have occurred in the past. Is there a solution to it? There's not a solution to everything. Sometimes things just happen, but if there's some solution that's affordable that we think we can put in place, then we're trying to hash those out and solve those problems.
Let's get into a couple of pieces of this puzzle that y'all put together. And first, something that's interesting that pops up right at the beginning is something you just discussed, which is new filings, right? You're trying to match up styles, servitudes, that kind of thing. One of the things that has not been done up until, if this ordinance is passed, is new filings are not presented at the front of the subdivision. They are presented where the subdivision would continue to, I guess you could say, push out into new filings. I know that this is something you and I have discussed on podcasts past. You brought it up. Let's hear where you're coming from with this.
Well, I guess back in the day when the original subdivision ordinance was written, and we talked about, and the previous councils had talked about notification, we wanted it on the nearest public street, to where the new subdivision was. And, we wanted to make it as noticeable to people. The problem is, I'm going to use Oak Hills as an example. Oak Hills has like 8 filings now.
Right.
Well, the way the law was written, the notification for the 7th filing would go at the entrance to the 7th filing. Well, guess what? If you lived in filing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you never saw that sign.
Right.
Yet you were impacted by the traffic, that increased in the area where you live. So what we're addressing is, we talked about connectivity. Used to, it was illegal to connect subdivisions together. The ordinance kind of prevented it. And now we've said, if a subdivision beside you and there's access, you got to connect it. If there's land beside you, you've got to put a stub out into it, to create connectivity so that we take the pressure off these entrances in a subdivision. And you end up with tons of people trying to go out in and out one entrance. So what we've addressed is signs got to go where it's always had to go. But the sign's got to go at the entrance to the subdivision. It's got to go at the entrance of filing 1. And if a subdivision has multiple entrances, it's got to go in every entrance so that everybody knows that there's going to be an additional filing in the back of the subdivision, not just those people that live next to it, because, people rarely who live in the front of a subdivision go to the back. And so there, especially these subdivisions that are ending up with 4, 5, 6, 7 filings, it doesn't happen. So they don't, those people are oblivious till after the process is gone. Cause you got to have your sign up, 10 days? I can't remember. 10 days before the meeting. So they put the sign up. You miss a notification process. You don't have the ability to go speak. Right. And so, typically the sign then comes down and it comes to the council. If you don't look for the council agenda every time there's going to be a meeting, you're not going to be aware. And so, these things were getting approved and passed and people didn't even know there was a filing. So we just decided to move. The part of this ordinance was to move the notification to the front of the subdivision.
So going ahead, we've talked about elevations a little bit as part of these final plans. One of the things that is mentioned in here that might give people some pause, so I want you to walk through it, is, striking through some of the old, I guess you could say, language and adding that, according to the ordinance, final plats will be mixed with 1988 elevation datum. First, I want you to cover that date and what an elevation datum is, and then why that particular date was picked, if there's any reason other than congruence.
Well, I guess the deal, there used to be a datum that was NAVID 29, which was NAVID 1929.
Right.
And then, with the advent of GPS, they came out with a WGS 84 and then a NAVID 88. And so consequently, the parish chose NAVID 88. Now, if I go out with the instrument and I shoot a elevation of 31 with Navi at 88, it could be 31.3 with WGS 84 and 29.8 with Navi at 29. There'll be minor variances. None of the variances will be significant, but you need to define which one the parish is going to use so that every elevation in the parish will be shot based on that data. Navid 88 being the most recent, that's the one the parish chooses to use. So all elevations will be based on based on that datum. It just defines it. Kind of like later on, if you go look at the drainage impact study, it defines what method you use so that so in the future, all drainage impact studies will be the same. Instead of going shopping for the one you want, you're going to use the one everybody uses. So it was early on, they just defined Navid 88 as being the datum that was used within the parish. And so anywhere you'll find the ordinance that refers to needing elevation shot, they're going to refer to what datum to use.
Speaking of elevations, you brought this up, getting into the specific section on land survey. I guess the initial question really is, was this not done before, or was it not done at that point in the process?
You talking about the as-built after the fact? Or?
Correct.
Yeah, there was never a requirement for an as-built. I mean, there was a final plan. In theory, it was built according to plan, and so, we've got copies of old plans, but, I know that there have been property lines changed. You go in and say, oh, look, we're going to squeeze 2 more lots in here, and you adjust the property line. Well, if you don't have an as-built as to where a drain pipe might be, you might end up putting something in an area that's not supposed to be. Plus, there's, I think back in the day that, there might be there's a subdivision built in my district. There was a lot that was, I think, supposed to be a park, like a community park deal. Somewhere back in 30 years ago, a house got built, on that lot that really originally wasn't a lot. And now, there's a drain line deep under somebody's house.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think over the years, that we just relied on construction plans and said that's the way it was built. And I think it's some of these issues are starting to raise their head because of time. Pipes are starting to wear out. And so we're seeing, you think a drain line under a house might be an isolated circumstance. And then you've got 4, within a particular gravity drainage district, and you realize, wait, there's a reason this is happening. How do we solve this? And I think that was the original thing that kind of got us looking at this. Then we'd get a call from planning and say, look, there's some contradictory language. Y'all made a change in this section, and there's some language in this other section that kind of contradicts it. We've passed this by Mr. Moody. We need to strike this in this other section. Or you've got to adjust, what you originally intended to do. So we kind of, there's some housekeeping that went through in this. But all the housekeeping was talked about, and why it got to that point, and that all the changes that the parish attorney said grace over before we did them.
Speaking of housekeeping, the next one we're talking about servitudes, and especially in minor resubs or small subdivisions. And one of the things it's talking about is the way variances are handled for servitudes, which, it's kind of an interesting thing. One of the things that's been discussed at the parish council a lot is you can't write a law that covers everything. So y'all are trying to clean this language up. Talk to us a little bit about, how often are variances requested on servitudes, and how does this kind of tie that up? And
variances on servitudes. There are not a lot of people request a variance on servitude, and the reason I'm saying is because, the health unit now requires a certain size servitude to access a piece of property if it's going to have a mechanical sewer treatment plant. So, there's some things that people used to could request that they can't request anymore because they basically make their property, unable to be developed. So, some of the stuff is going away. This particular deal was that there was a variance written into the ordinance. If a thing only had a certain number of lots, then you could request a variance on what. We just took that out. It doesn't matter if you build 1 lot, 3 lots, 7 lots on the minor. You're going to put the servitudes in that need to be in. And then if there's an issue, you can come to the council and everything can be evaluated on a one-on-one basis. I remember when I was elected, I'm like, we shouldn't give waivers. Man, I haven't been in office a couple months, and a elderly lady from Watson comes and sees me, and she explains why she wants to subdivide her property. And she explained that, they're not able to maintain all this other property. They don't want to leave their home, but they can't deal with the other acreage that they have. But they can't, the way the law's written, they technically can't cut it out and sell it because it would create too many lots on a private servitude. It just didn't make sense in this particular situation that law applied. I understand why the law was written to stop many subdivisions, but we're going to penalize somebody who's lived in a residence their whole life, who now is at a point in the time that they can't afford or not physically able to maintain, an extra 3 acres of land. But we're not going to allow them to sell it because, the way the ordinance is written, they can't subdivide it.
Right.
It just didn't make sense to me.
Right.
And I think you've heard me talk about it before. When I was elected, everything was black and white. And then when you sit down and talk to people one-on-one, and you look at their problems, and you look at how the law's written, and you know what the intent of the law was for, and it really wasn't to penalize them or stop them from doing what they're doing. It's just that you can't write a perfect law. Variances and waivers and things just became, if you analyze them individually, they just make sense to me. So that's kind of, I know there's some people who hammer us every time we do one, but trust me, I take them seriously, and I go look at them. I usually visit with the individual, find out why, and we move forward. There's some, we did a variance, we did an ordinance on, subdivisions. Some subdivisions were designed for open ditches. And so we said, you can't put a culvert in a subdivision designed for an open ditch. But then they started grant waivers, Well, I know where my drainage issues in my, district are. I know that, subdivision A has a drainage problem. No, I'm not gonna let you put a culvert in that ditch. Not gonna grant you a waiver when I know darn good and well that they've got drainage problems already. And if you go putting culverts in and filling it with dirt, you're gonna restrict the flow of water even more. So you just got to use common sense in your approach to waivers. And I think that's what you got to do. You got to eliminate a bunch of confusing wording in these ordinances, make them simple, and then if somebody gets caught, you got to evaluate how that law impacts them and was that the intent. And if it wasn't the intent, then you make a judgment and present to the other 8 councilmen and see what happens. So,
and you brought up a lot during that. We were talking through waivers, but one of the things that you brought up that is important is drainage. You said where the drainage issues are. One of the things that is built into this, cleanup, I guess you can say, is some exemptions for Gravity Drainage District 2. Couple of things here. Of course, there are 2 other funded Gravity districts, 1 and 5. So interested to see if they were contacted or if they're fine with what Gravity 2 put in there. Also curious about what are these exceptions all about? When Gravity 2 got in touch with you guys.
So Gravity 2, most of Gravity 2 resides within Council District 2. There's some that goes in 1, some that goes in 3. They invited me to the meeting prior to COVID. I'll just be honest with you. And so we went in, sat down, and they had a list of things they would like to see addressed. So I said, y'all pass a resolution, get it to me. I'll bring it before the council and we'll start working on it. In the interim, COVID came. We didn't do a lot of meetings. So this thing's been dragging on since, the first of the year. But Gravity 1, I think with the final, this thing will be voted on the 9th. Gravity 1, it'll be amended to say Gravity 1 also. And depending on whether Gravity 5 has a meeting by then, it might be amended to reflect all 3 gravity dangerous districts. And I'll tell you what it's about. A lot of it is about the type of pipe being used. I'll use Easterly Lakes as an example. Easterly Lakes, most of the lateral ditches are culverted. The parish design standard calls for a bitmus-coated metal pipe. 50% of the houses in Easterly have pool. 40% of the houses have pool.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about. So we're wasting. We get a rain, we're pumping our water out, we're backwashing our pools. Different things are happening. Depending on where you're at in Easterly, there's some culverts that have been in the ground 20 years, 18 years that are failing. And so our point is why put a 20-year product or 25-year product in the ground when there's a 75-year product?
Right.
That's not significantly more expensive. And so that was kind of the reasoning behind some of the changes. I'm looking to where that, I think it's back here where it talks about the Gravity 2 exception. And it's pretty simple. Gravity 2 just basically says that any new subsurface culverts that are installed within their district, they want to approve. So if you want to get a subsurface culvert installed in Gravity 2, you got to go through the permitting office and you got to go to Gravity 2 now after this is done. And then it's going to become that way in Gravity 1 and possibly Gravity 5's drainage district. And then permits will be granted for subsurface if it makes improvements. If you installing subsurface hinders the flow of water, they're not going to approve it. And then, of course, any new installation will be sized by an engineer, so that, look, back in the day, you'd ride up to a house, had a 15-inch culvert on the left, 15-inch culvert on the right. Oh, we need a 15-inch culvert in the middle. Makes common sense. Well, these could be undersized. You got to look at the whole aspect. And then with respect to putting culverts in ditches, I got a 15-inch driveway culvert. I just put 15-inch culvert through the length of front of my house. Well, look, I'm not a hydrologist, so I don't understand it. All I can do is listen to the experts. One 20-foot, 15-inch culvert restricts the water, some amount.
Right.
120 foot of 15-inch culvert restricts it significantly more. However, you could upsize that 15-inch culvert to an 18 for 120 feet or a 24 for 120 feet, right, and never change the impact on the flow of water. So I think that's what they want to do. They want to make sure that there's engineering going into the design and size selection of these culverts, so we're not randomly we're spending money on all this design, and then later on, when people own a piece of property, the implementation isn't there because they're just throwing something in the ground that restricts the flow. So why do we spend all the money on the front end if we're going to come butcher it up in the backside? Right. So I think that's kind of the process that they went through. They talked about what type of materials could be utilized, and basically the only restriction is that bimitmus coated metal pipe aren't acceptable anymore. They want all those pipes to be polymer coated. Reinforced concrete still available. Polyvinyl chloride still available. And then they just want to define. They want to make sure that the pipes are put in according to standards. And then they want to make sure that when the pipes are backfilled, that there's a representative Gravity 2 there to ensure that it's done properly. then it just says they won't install them. And that if they find you doing a project outside the scope of and not following the process, we granted the council gave them the ability to issue a cease and desist. So we just gave them the ability to have some say so over the drainage in the area that they're charged to do is, maintain the drainage. I think there was one other change that we made that wasn't specific to them. It was just in retrospect to subsurface drainage. You'll have an open ditch, comes another open ditch. Well, whenever that happened, you had to put a culvert in one of the ditches so that you could have a cross through. If you're servicing it or trying to maintain it, you didn't want to have to ride all the way around that ditch. So wherever one open ditch met another open ditch, there had to be a culvert installed. A lot of times the parish allowed for PVC pipe to be installed. Well, it would be out in the sun because it was hanging out in the air and it would start breaking and deteriorating. So we eliminated that down to only a polymer pipe. And then we said if the bank was embedded or, with riprap or whatever, you only had to stick out a foot instead of sticking out 4 foot. So we did just some little things that'll, maybe make the pipe last a little longer. And then, it'll cut some costs down, but it'll also make things easier to maintain. Instead of having that, if you're coming to work on a bank or whatever, you don't have to deal with that long pipe sticking out. So they were just things that the district came about and said that we would like to see this happen, because ultimately after the subdivision's developed, and then, 20, 25 years later, when those pipes start failing, it's the responsibility of the gravity drainage district to take care of those laterals. And so, I think as time passes and you see problems and you that pipe was supposed to last longer than that. Well, yeah, but in these subdivisions, things are getting introduced to them that they might not have thought would be in there. And so consequently, they're trying to adjust to, make something more economically viable, so to speak. It's easier, much more inexpensive for the developer to spend a few more dollars on the front end than for the district to have to come change everything out later on, and less intrusive to the the people that live in the subdivision. So I think that was part of what they brought to us, and why that section went in there.
So, want to define a couple of things real quick. You talked about putting in culverts. But then you said driveway culverts. Want to remind folks there are two different things. There are people that have come to y'all and had, you have to have a culvert under your driveway.
Right,
it's got to pass underneath that. But there are people that have requested subsurface drainage be installed in front of their house when it was a subdivision designed for ditches. So that's important because those smaller pipes, a lot of times those ditches can fill up a lot more than those pipes you are constricting the area. So that wanted to find that. Also, wanted to hear a lot of times lately the phrase riprap has been used. What exactly goes into riprap?
Well, I mean, basically, it depends on what you're talking about. But in a bank situation, like a bank of a canal, usually it's pretty big rock. You know what I'm talking about? And there's a standard written in the ordinance that defines what it is. At the same time, when we're talking about roads, it might be the when you grind the old asphalt up, you get a fine riprap type mix that you can then come reuse that still has bonding capabilities and will compact, in a hole. So yeah, it's just riprap, I guess, by definition is just, can be rock or, recycled concrete or whatever. But yeah, it depends on, in a ditch or an embankment, it's usually has a geofabric put behind it and then heavy stone or boulder, put on top of it so as to stop erosion.
Got it. So, when we're talking through a lot of this, it's interesting, especially here at the end. We're talking about drainage. A lot of this, we're talking about ditches. We're talking about overall drainage into, large scale canals near these subdivisions. But really what we're hearing is trying to, it goes beyond that. You're trying to add more eyes on the process. So, when just going past cleaning it up, is that really what y'all are looking for here?
Yeah, I think ultimately the more people that put their eyes on something, the ability to identify, potential problems. The young lady that we have that reviews almost all stuff in the parish is really good at what she does, but she's not really a field engineer. You know what I'm saying? There's a different type thing. So, and I'm not saying she doesn't have practical field experience, but she doesn't go watch them cut ditches every day. You know what I'm saying? So she might not realize that has a potential design problem in the future. And so, there's a gravity drainage district has an engineer, and that's exactly what he does. I mean, that's all he does. So, we have him review that. There might be a particular situation with respect to how some sewers design, and then so the sewer district has some engineer that, specializes in sewer that looks at that. When we talked about the grinder pump thing, sometimes it's not the grinder pump situation the problem. It's the run and the head pressure that's being developed, on all those pumps based on how long the pipe is. The review engineer's looking at our ordinances. You know what I'm saying? Said, it meets our ordinances. But she might not realize that extra 50 foot of pipe created so much head pressure it's going to cause the grinder pumps to fail. And that's so you get a sewer engineer looking at that. And so, yeah, the more people that have specialties that look at, what you're talking about, then obviously you're going to identify problems, and you're going to end up with, if you identify the problem before it's constructed, able to make the proper adjustments, you're going to end up with a better product. And so the idea is that the more people you can have look at it, the more hands you have on it, the more people that watch something be, put in the ground, then they're gonna see if there are mistakes being made. Contractors are human beings. There'll be a guy out there laying pipe one day, and he might have had a really bad day. And so it's coming to the end of the day. He's been a bad day, and it's like, I really ought to redo that. Oh, to heck with it. It'll be okay. But if you got somebody else coming behind him and shooting elevation and looking at that stuff, he goes like, that wasn't done right.
Right.
We need to go ahead and pull this joint out and correct it.
Right.
And so, I think, everybody's human. Everybody has bad days. Everybody makes mistakes. I think the more people look at it, then obviously you're going to catch those little mistakes, and you're going to get them corrected, and you're going to get a better finished product in the end.
So, beyond the surveyor, that was added was that a lot of these, final drawings, as is drawings, however you want to put it, are going to be put in front of those groups that you just talked about. So from the final standpoint, sort of wrapping this up, when you're talking about all those groups getting to put their eyes on it and possibly a little more local control, if you will, you're trying to make sure that when these homeowners buy in Livingston Parish, that they are getting the best final product.
Absolutely. I mean, the ultimate goal is that when you buy a lot here, that you don't end up with surprises. That when you go, buy that forever home and you're 250 grand into it or whatever it is, that you don't have some grinder pump that you're having to replace every 6 months, or you've got some ditch that doesn't drain, or you've got some washout that you can't get anybody to take care of. We want to be sure, to the best of our ability, that as many eyes have looked over those plans and the construction of those lots, so that when you buy a lot, you're going to be satisfied with what you've got. And the council feels that they've done all they can to make sure that everything's done as properly as possible.
And that goes the other direction as well, because within those subdivisions, as well as the council, a lot of this stuff either became the responsibility of those subdivisions or y'all. So in the end, trying to figure out how to make more longevity saves you money.
Well, you're absolutely right. Even though those technical gravity drainage districts are standalone, they're a subdivision of parish government. The sewer district is a subdivision of parish government. So ultimately, the buck stops at parish government. If those things don't do what they're supposed to do, or aren't able to do what they need to do for financial reasons, it's gonna fall back on the council and the administration. So it's yeah, we want to make things last as long, be installed properly, because in the long run it'll cost less to maintain it, and other things can be able to be improved, with those dollars that they have.
One last time, we are here with Mr. Garry Frog Talbert. We appreciate you joining us. Y'all will be voting on this first meeting of July, correct?
July 9th. I won't be there, but yeah, I mean, I'm doing a wifey thing. So,
okay.
But yeah, it'll be July 9th. The council will vote on it. I think that, what we're seeing is that this work that we're doing in ordinance committee, it's almost unanimous when it comes out, because everybody's had the input. There's been a lot of eyes on it. And I think that, by the time it gets to the council, everybody's looked at every possible issue, and we've tried to address everybody's concern to make sure that the final product's something they can be proud of and you can vote for.
Again, Mr. Garry Frog Talbert, representative from District 2, which is the Watson area. Appreciate you joining us, sir. We were talking about the subdivision ordinance today, trying to clean it up, trying to make it better for the parish council, trying to make it better for new homeowners. One last time, my name is McHugh David, publisher and editor of the news. Appreciate you guys joining us for the Livingston Parish News Podcast, where we try to bring you political news, business news, sports news, everything we can that's going on here in Livingston Parish. We are actually going to be joined by Mr. Tracy Girlinghouse, who is the representative from District 7. He and I are going to be talking about some subdivision stuff as well, but also rebooting the master plan amid all this COVID-19 stuff. We hope you all have a great day, and we will see you next time.